Hi, everyone. We're back to follow up on the Diddy mini episode that we recorded and released on Tuesday of this week. Cassie released a formal response to Diddy's apology and the events that transpired during her relationship with Diddy for the first time today. What are your thoughts, friend?
Ooh. Um, just in awe of her courage
Mm-hmm.
and how she is proving probably some of the narrative that he told her by way of his abuse, but also she told herself because of being a victim that she wasn't strong and that she wasn't powerful. And to stand up in this way and to let your voice be heard, first through the lawsuit and now this message that she did not have to give us, by the way. She did not have to say anything. She owes us nothing. But she was very specific about her support of other victims and survivors. And so I just stand in awe of her. Cassie, we love you. We cannot say that enough. And I know you did not go into this wanting to be kind of this poster child for survivors and maybe even an activist or an advocate. But your actions have been inspirational to us all, and we're grateful.
Absolutely. I think I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I also think it kind of exemplifies how what is an outward presentation of someone's life is not always an actual depiction of what's going on. Um, and so if you were to look at her social media over the last few years, she's happily married, she has two beautiful girls. Um, she seemingly moved on from her relationship with Diddy. And I think it's just another reminder that we just never know what someone's dealing with. And that trauma, particularly trauma to this extent, is something that you never get over. And she said that, right? That this is something she will be dealing with for the rest of her life. And she's right. She will always be in recovery from this. It doesn't define her, but it is with her. You can't unlive it.
Yeah. And she said, with a lot of hard work, I am better today, but I will always be recovering from my past, to your point.
Yes. The other thing, and I think this is what is so important, at least from my perspective, is that we learned about the lawsuit months ago, Tashira.
Months.
And everything we hypothesized about it based on the lawsuit is absolutely 100% true.
Also, I just let me just say this, and goes back to believing just women in general. Your hypothesis is so well informed as a law professor and a long time domestic violence advocate, attorney, litigator. You have been published on these issues everywhere, including the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, let's
Oh,
just read the resume, Margo. Me, as an also an attorney, met you at a domestic violence clinic at Georgetown and as a survivor. So I just want to put that out there. Not that our experiences should be the most important, but we were
no,
not just kind of picking this stuff out of thin air. But go ahead.
absolutely. I think what it shows is that no one is sharing information like this because they want to. No one chooses to be in a violent relationship. No one chooses to be essayed.
Mm-mm,
And the vast majority of people who've been impacted by it are not lying.
mm-mm. No, I mean, think about what, and I think we probably said this before, what it meant for her to have to look an attorney in the face and probably recount this countless times just about one of these things that she said, which was the freak offs and the countless stereotypes that women of color face every single day, and what it means just to be a woman and being denied any kind of bodily autonomy. To have to say something that would put you in a negative light, specifically around sex, why would you make that up? There's no amount of money that would be worth it to lie about something like that, not
Nope.
when it's against someone who is in the public eye
Or anywhere.
or anywhere or anywhere, but especially someone
Yeah,
that you
absolutely. I
know
mean,
this is
the
going to be
power,
public.
absolutely. And so everything we said months ago and everything we said on Tuesday has turned out to be true, right? That these allegations happened. Um, we believe them, of course, before there was a video depiction, but the lawsuit spelled them out, and then they were shown on the video. Diddy made an apology, but never apologized and never took responsibility.
It was the drugs. He was in a dark place. Hmm.
And now we have a statement from Cassie.
Absolutely. I want to just read one more thing that I thought was beautiful about this, because we're going to talk today specifically about how hard it can be to leave. So she said, I offer my hand to those that are still living in fear. Reach out to your people. Don't cut them off. No one should carry this weight alone. For you, Margo, as someone who has represented countless people
Mhm.
around this issue, leaving, what goes into that, and what have you seen?
Right. So, what I read from this section of the statement are two things. One, leaving is the most dangerous time in a violent relationship by far. It's called separation abuse. And what we see and what the data shows is that the highest rates of homicide and really lethal violence happen during a period of separation. So, separating is actually incredibly, incredibly challenging, for one, for lethal reasons. The second reason it's really hard to leave a domestic violence relationship is because of what we know as the cycle of violence, which will seem very familiar to you, Tashira, right? Which, of course, not every relationship follows the same pattern, but there are consistent patterns in these relationships based on a differential of power and control. In the cycle of violence, there are typically around three types of behaviors. One is in the beginning of a relationship, which often has what we call love bombing, right? So often
Yep.
these relationships kind of come on very fast and heavy. And once the relationship is established at some level, we move into what's called the tension building stage. So a lot of victims will report after kind of the initial honeymoon stage, there's a tension building stage where people feel like they're walking on eggshells, waiting for a shoe to drop. Nothing bad necessarily or violent has happened, but it is very tense. And from that stage, you go to an acute or abusive incident. So that's where there's the explosion, the physical incident, the time where your stuff is thrown on the lawn, police are called, you go to the hospital. And then after that, you move back to the honeymoon stage,
Yes.
where there are these big public apologies,
Yep.
big, big over the top um, gestures of love. During this period, you see people moving in together or getting engaged or getting pregnant, getting married, public flowers at work, big admissions in church, people going to rehab, right? Like these big things where it makes it even harder to leave. So we
Mhm.
have that it's really lethal to leave in these relationships, and it's really hard to leave. And by the time you are there, this is the other thing that I read from Cassie's statement. You've probably been so isolated from your family and friends that where are you going to go?
Um, where are you going to go? And also, there is such shame that victims carry. And so to have to go back home and starting over from zero, and to admit, you know what, you were right about that person. I told you that they were misunderstood. I told you that, I was partly to blame. I told you that, they really loved me, but I was wrong, mom, grandma, sister, cousin, auntie. And now I'm here. And also, it's maybe even me and my children, right? And we need support in a particular way. Having to admit that alone is so incredibly difficult. And you're willing sometimes, and in my case especially, to just roll the dice. Just roll the dice and deal with the devil that you know.
It just makes me think that there were times when Cassie maybe tried to share what was going on and either wasn't believed, or by the time it got to that point, she had been so isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also have to think, I don't know this to be true about Diddy, but there is a very, very famous scene in What's Love Got to Do with It, which recounts the horrific abuse that Tina Turner faced at the hands of her ex-husband, Ike Turner. where they depict her calling home and telling her mother that she and her children were on their way down. She was going to flee, escape. And people probably remember this. She says on the phone to her mom, "What? Ike bought you a house? When did Ike buy you a house?" And what it signified is that it was a manipulation of those around her. So even if you want to leave, even if you try to leave, I'm going to put myself in a position to be the savior to everyone around you. They're not even going to believe you because I'm the good person, and I'm going to use my money and my power and my access to shape shift and to shape a narrative.
Absolutely. And by that point too, right, not only is the victim so broken down, but she or he is actually broken down. So there may actually be other things going on. And in the case of Cassie and Diddy, right, we know that there was quite a bit of illicit drug use. Now, without any iota of judgment, because I have none, what certain drugs can do to your mental state is make you confused and not remember and disbelieve yourself.
Yep.
And, right. And so all of the qualities involved in what we think of as this like ideal victim, he had kind of shaved off of her.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to say that one of the things I have heard personally and heard in the court of public opinion is, how could she stay after what we saw? Why is it so hard to leave? You mentioned a statistic before we got on today's Zoom that I thought was really important about how hard it is to leave and the amount of times. Can you share that again, Em?
Yeah. So we talked about how lethal it was. We talked about why, right? The cycle of violence. And what the data shows is that it takes individuals who want to leave a violent relationship between 7 and 9 times of actually leaving. So that's like actually packing up your bags and moving out. It takes 7 to 9 times of doing that and coming back to actually make a clean break. So what that tells me is that that video shows her leaving.
One of the
And that
times,
video also shows why she couldn't leave because he literally dragged her back.
literally.
And then I read something and saw something that days later from that incident, after that incident, they were on the red carpet together. And if you looked closely, you could see bruising. So this idea of wanting to go back or deciding to go back, I really encourage us all to kind of release judgment around that and understand that no one is choosing to be in a terrible situation because they want to. That's just not a choice people would make.
And we have got to get rid of this mindset that people lie and choose to be abused because of money. Because there is no amount of money to have made it worth it. None.
She was a prisoner.
There's no red carpets that maybe she was allowed to go to. This is a man who, as we talked about before, forced her within a short time frame to get her breast implants redone because he didn't like the way they looked.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
But now he's using other people to commit abusive acts. It's not a fun existence. She's not on a yacht actually having a great time. She's not living this celebrity dream life. That's what we want to believe because that's the lie that Hollywood so often tells us. But back to your point, Margo, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes for people.
We have to understand that suffering is local and that everyone suffers, and that what we see about people's lives is one version, even if some things are hard that we see.
Yeah.
And that really bad things happen to people that people do not share or don't feel comfortable sharing for fear of being judged.
Because look what happened. Look what happened.
The other thing that I think, we haven't talked about yet, but I think bears mentioning, right? The video was from 2016.
Mm-hmm.
That is 8 years ago, Tashira. Right? So this woman has been, the video, among all of the other things we now know to have happened, right, has had to be living with this for her entire marriage and her entire identity as a mother. I can't even imagine what it's been like to raise two daughters during this. And I'm not making it gendered, raising any children.
During this time, and the amount of work it takes to get over that level of trauma and abuse. It's just, again, our hearts go out to her. We know that her husband released a statement before she did. She released her statement today. But
But
let's
what
talk
did her husband's statement say?
He basically said what she said, which is believe women, number one. Number two, Diddy is a monster. He shared a hotline for people to go and get help. And he just talked about holding her close. I'm generalizing and, summarizing it. But essentially, he really talked about how many women are being victimized in this way and stood up for them.
1 in 3. So you asked me something before we got on the call about the role of her husband.
Yeah.
So we know her husband. We don't know much about kind of when their romantic relationship started, but we do know how they met. They met through Diddy.
Yeah.
He was her personal trainer that was approved by Diddy. And you asked me, what do you say to this idea that she needed to be saved by someone?
That's the narrative that somehow.
Right, that's the narrative. What do you say to the narrative that she needed to be saved by someone? And I said, it's so complicated. Because she didn't, but for her to be taken seriously, maybe she did.
She didn't, but she did.
And that's not her problem. That's our problem.
Big facts, Margo, big facts, because I know people in my personal life, someone in particular who went through a horrific divorce. And on the other side of it was having some custody issues and issues with drop off and pickup and harassment, all the things. And her brother said to me, I had to move here because I know that he's not going to respect my sister unless I'm present. She's not married. She needs a man to protect her. And it's like, what just happened to human decency and values? Now, arguably, obviously, when you're dealing with a monster like Diddy, those are out the door. But what does it mean that men only respect other men and not a woman enough to not abuse and harm them? Not all.
That sounds like a male problem to me, not a female problem.
Once again.
Right. So that's an abuser issue. And so do I think that the narrative holds? Maybe in this situation and maybe in others. I was saying to you, there's another pretty famous local story that the survivor talks about. So the former governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, who ran for president, is married to this incredible lawyer or former lawyer. She's retired now, and she is very active in the domestic violence space here in Massachusetts and had her own survivorship story where she was in a very violent marriage, I believe during law school, while she was in law school, and had been trying to leave and met Deval. And she really credits Deval in many ways as helping her safely leave. Yeah. And while that's beautiful in some ways, right? They've had a very successful, loving, from what we can say, 50-year marriage. I don't want to focus so much on that because I think it gives too much credit to the second husband, to the second relationship. And if it is true, then that's another problem with the patriarchy, right? But it makes sense. Who could she talk to? Who could Cassie talk to other than her doctors and her personal trainer?
Yeah, and even then, I'm sure it took time for her to even be able to trust this person because everybody is working. When he could call the doctor and demand the doctor come in and change her and do surgery like beyond what a reasonable physician would say is actually healthy for her body, imagine who else was under his thumb and control.
Well, not even what's healthy for her body. I mean, I believe that violates a Hippocratic oath.
It has to.
She's not in his custody. She's not his child. He can't make medical decisions for her.
But I'm sure on paper it looked like it was consensual, right?
I'm sure, right?
But
But the
again,
doctor must have.
the brainwashing that is occurring behind the scenes, for sure. And I just want to lift something up really quickly. I'll get back to this idea about needing to be saved or not. Some people don't realize that they're being abused.
Mm-hmm.
And,
That's
and
so
that
true.
was my personal experience. And so I just want to put that out there when we are saying, why doesn't she just leave? They just leave. They may not know that they are being abused. They may have normalized this. They have been gaslit. They have been psychologically manipulated
Yeah.
and told up is down, down is up. They've been isolated. They may not know. And even when you get out, it took me years to contend with fully that that is what happened to me. Because to admit it was part of the trauma that I was not able and ready at that time to face.
Absolutely. And I can't help but wonder, and it doesn't really even matter, but I think it is helpful to situate this situation for people who are confused how this came out. And I'm wondering if she, you know, didn't really share, even with her husband, and it came out in like therapy, or, she had some sort of physical manifestation of her trauma, like stopped sleeping or had a lot of pain,
Yeah.
and that's how it all started coming out.
Yeah. Yeah, which brought her to this point. And like, as I mentioned, I want to get back to her husband. If that is what she needed to be able to land on solid ground, then go off, sis. I
Mhm.
love it for you. If it is a healthy and whole relationship, I love it for you. And again, F the patriarchy that may have made it necessary. But in the real time, in the immediate, we can contend with our current circumstances while wishing for a different life. And by that, I
Yes.
mean, we can welcome love in all forms when we need it the most. And we can also say F the patriarchy
Right.
simultaneously.
And F the fact that maybe Diddy wouldn't leave her alone until she was in another serious relationship. I mean, that could
So
be true,
real.
right? That could be true. That's not Cassie's problem.
I know so many people who have had, think about the amount of times where either you were in the club one night and you didn't want to be harassed, so you grabbed your friend's hand. Pretend to be my man. I've had that happen. My times I've been trying to get somebody to just leave me alone, stop calling me before you could block somebody, and then said, you know what, I got a boyfriend. They stopped calling. So many micro and macro examples I'm sure we can all relate to.
Yeah, because in the club, people are always trying to dance with me.
Margo, you're fighting them off every time we go play. Yeah, you're like, get back, bruh. Like, yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I digress. Yes, yes. It all makes me so sad. And some people on our last video, we talked a little bit about, people were confused why he hadn't been arrested, especially now that it was on video. And we talked about this idea of a statute of limitations and having to have a police report. And someone asked, well, could he be tried for kidnapping? Or
Ooh,
could he be tried for or could he be tried for SA?
okay. Something that has a longer statute of limitations, you
Or
mean?
the
Okay.
R word, right?
Right.
Which
Okay.
may, in many cases, I do not know California law. I am not an attorney barred in California, but in many, many states, um, most forms of SA, especially the R word, have a
Mhm.
much longer statute of limitations for this reason precisely.
Gotcha.
And it is possible, I guess, particularly if there's a longer statute of limitations, there would still need to be a police report, and they would still need to have a participating witness victim. And I think we have talked about this on some of our episodes, particularly the episode related to how our public systems may be failing us. And I think especially around SA and DV, the reliance of most of us on the criminal justice system as the way that a survivor is going to get justice. Sure, for some people, maybe, but it is very unlikely
Mm,
that justice is going to be obtained through the court system. It is very unlikely, even if Diddy were charged with the R word or kidnapping that he would be convicted. And even if he were convicted, it is very unlikely that he would go to jail. That is a system-wide problem. That is not Cassie's problem. And so I really vehemently want to protect her from people criticizing her over not filing a police report or not pursuing justice in that way.
Girl, because back to my initial statement, she's already given so much, been through so much harm, and given us more than I think we can even give her credit for in real time. It will be us looking back at this moment in 5 to 10 years that we're going to really realize what this woman has done.
So if we want to correct or course correct the system, then we need to have a system that holds people accountable in different ways. And maybe not having, we could have a whole episode on other ways he could be held accountable criminally without the onus being on Cassie.
Yeah, the harmed party. I mean, this is where I think restorative justice conversations probably need to enter the chat. And folks who have expertise there, please let us know down below. But we know that relying on the carceral system alone is just simply not going to do it. So in many ways, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you are Black and brown, you were either harmed by the system, or when you seek protection in this way, you don't receive it. So once again, you are harmed by the system.
And like everything we know about the system, right? Diddy's not white, but everything else about him holds so much privilege in society. He's a man and he has money and he has power. And we know that there were substances involved in many of these incidents. So what does that do? How would that come in? It would question her credibility, even though we know that that has nothing to do with what happened.
So I want to bring up, when I talk about her bravery, I want to bring up Melissa Ford. Do you know Melissa Ford, Margo? So Melissa with the Y, I like to say, old school, triple OG, video vixen, they used to be called back in the day. They've now become IG models, professionally pretty people. But she was one of like the initial cadre of these folks. And she used to be in all of these music videos with Jay-Z and everybody you can probably think of, Ja Rule, between the late 90s and the early 2000s. And I saw her on, I believe it was Angie Martinez's show. And she was just recounting that time. And they got on the topic of essentially Me Too and how much of the behaviors of that time period are now coming to rise and to the forefront, right? Abuse, R-word, essay. We are applying these terms in the context that they should have been applied back then, today. And what she said was, and I will never forget this, she said, I have so many stories and I am not going to share them because I am not well enough to do so. She said, I lost my mom. I've gone through so much. Basically, my mental health is not in a position for me to share those parts of my life. I can empathize, I can sympathize, I can support other people who are choosing to share. But she said, what I know about me and my level of self-awareness is that basically I ain't got it to give. And I was so proud because I thought that was so
good for her.
Yeah.
Because
So
it is not the responsibility of the victim.
We're asking the harmed party. I don't know very many other times that this is true. We are asking the harmed party to be harmed and traumatized again in order to seek justice, if it's even possible to receive it. And when you talk about it being in the court of now the public opinion on top of that, it's so much. It is so much.
And all of the narratives that we talked about, kind of bringing it back, the tropes about women being loose and, video with people on videos and Black women and, oh, you asked for it.
Look at how she was dressed. I mean, she made a career
out of being sexy. Didn't she think that people were going to come on to her?
So of course that was going to happen. Of course she was going to be essayed or R-worded. Of course she was going to be in unsafe positions. She put herself there.
That is not the world we want to leave for the next generation.
Well, I'm sure there will be lots more to discuss, if not on this issue, unfortunately others, because that is the world that we currently live in, although we are fighting to change.
Absolutely. So thanks for listening. Drop your questions below, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
See you soon, y'all.
Thanks for listening to Justice. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to learn more about our podcast, be sure to check us out on our website at justicepodcast.com. You can also reach out to us there if you want to be featured on the show, or if you have a business or a product that you think would be a good fit for our audience. Thanks again for listening.